Dr. Han Jae-won stared at her computer screen in the quiet research lab. It was 3 a.m., and she was the only person still working at the Korean Space Research Institute. The red numbers on her coffee cup showed that it was her 4th cup tonight. But she couldn't sleep, not after what she had just seen. She checked the data again. The signals from Mars were still there. They came in regular patterns, like a heartbeat. Every 12 minutes, they appeared. They were too regular to be natural. This can't be right, she said to herself. She had been watching Mars for 5 years, but she had never seen anything like this. The signals came from Jezero crater, where NASA's old rover had once looked for signs of life. She reached for her phone to call Dr. Kim Ta-sung, her senior colleague. Then she stopped. Kim was always quick to dismiss new ideas. He would probably tell her she was seeing things because she was tired. The lab door opened. Dr. Park Min-ho walked in, carrying his own coffee cup. He was the new astrobiologist who had joined their team last week. He had moved from the United States to Korea just for this job. "You're here early," Jae-won said, checking her watch. It was 3:30 a.m. now. "Actually, I never left," Min-ho said with a smile. "I was in the other lab. Jet lag is still keeping me awake." He walked over to her desk. "What are you working on?" Jae-won pointed to her screen. "Look at this. These signals from Mars. They appear every 12 minutes exactly. I've checked the equipment 3 times. It's working perfectly." Min-ho put his coffee down and leaned closer to the screen. His eyes widened. "How long has this been happening?" "I first noticed it 6 hours ago, but when I checked our older data, I found the same pattern going back 3 days. Jae-won pulled up another graph. "See, it's getting stronger each day." Min-ho pulled up a chair and sat down. "This is incredible. Have you told anyone else?" "Not yet. I wanted to be sure first." Jae-won looked at him. "Dr. Kim would probably say I'm wasting time." Min-ho shook his head. "No, you're doing exactly what a good scientist should do. Being careful, double-checking." He looked at the screen again. "But now, I think it's time to tell others. This is too important to keep quiet." Jae-won nodded slowly. She picked up her phone again and called Dr. Kim. It rang 5 times before he answered. "Do you know what time it is?" Kim's voice was rough with sleep. "Sir, I'm sorry to wake you, but you need to see this. We're picking up regular signals from Mars. Dr. Park is here too. He can confirm what I'm seeing." There was a long pause. Then Kim said, "Regular how?" "Every 12 minutes. Exactly. For the past 3 days. And they're getting stronger." Another pause. "I'll be there in 30 minutes. Don't tell anyone else yet." An hour later, the small lab was crowded. Dr. Kim had called the institute's director, who had called others. Now 10 people stood around Ji-won's computer, watching the signals appear again and again. "It could be equipment failure," someone said. "We've checked everything," Jae-won replied. 3 times. "Could it be interference from our own satellites?" another person asked. Min-ho shook his head. "The signals are definitely coming from Mars, specifically from Jezero crater." The director looked at all of them. "If this is real," she said slowly, "it could change everything. Dr. Han, Dr. Park, I want you to keep monitoring these signals. Dr. Kim, start putting together a report. But nobody talks about this outside this room. Not until we're absolutely sure." As people began to leave, Min-ho turned to Jae-won. "You know what this could mean, right? If these signals are artificial." Jae-won nodded. She looked at her screen one more time, watching as another signal appeared, right on schedule. "It means we're not alone. It means Mars isn't as dead as we thought." Outside the lab windows, the sun was rising over Seoul. It was the beginning of a new day. And possibly, Jae-won thought, the beginning of something much bigger. 2 months after the discovery of the signals, Captain Lee Sun-mai sat in a large meeting room at the Korean Space Research Institute. Around her sat representatives from space agencies around the world. They had been meeting for 5 hours, and they were finally reaching a decision. The Institute's director stood up. "We all agree then. The Korean International Mars Initiative will launch in 6 months. Captain Lee will lead the mission." Sunma looked down at the papers in front of her. She had been preparing for a Mars mission her whole life, but she never expected it would happen like this. The signals from Mars had changed everything. What should have taken years of planning was now being rushed forward in months. "Captain," Dr. Han Jae-won called from across the room. "We need to start choosing the crew today." Sun Lee nodded. She already had a list in mind. She needed the best people, but they also needed to work well together. Living on a spacecraft for 8 months would test even the strongest relationships. Later that day, Sun Mei sat with Jae-won and Dr. Kim Tae-sung, reviewing personnel files. The first choice was easy. "Dr. Choi Yuna," Sun Mei said, showing them the file. "She's the best botanist in Korea, and she has experience working in isolated environments. She spent 2 years at the research station in Antarctica." "Good choice," Kim agreed. "We'll need someone who understands how life might survive in harsh conditions." Next, Sun Mei pulled out another file. "Dr. Kang Do-hyun. He's a geological expert, and he's already studied more Mars rock samples than anyone else in Asia." They continued through the files until they had their core team. 8 people who would risk everything to find out what was sending those signals from Mars. The next 4 months passed in a blur of preparation. The spacecraft, named Hangul-1, was modified to carry the crew and their equipment. It was the most advanced spacecraft ever built, a joint project between Korean and international engineers. Sun Mei spent every day training with her crew. They practiced emergency procedures until they could do them in their sleep. They learned to repair every part of the spacecraft. They studied the latest Mars data over and over. One evening, as they finished another long day of training, Dr. Choi Yuna approached Sun Mei. "Captain," Yuna said quietly, "may I ask you something?" "Of course." "Are we ready?" "Really ready. We're going so much faster than planned." Sun Mei looked at her team member carefully. "No, we're not as ready as we would be with more time. But the signals are getting stronger every week. Whatever is causing them, it might not wait for us to be perfectly ready." Yana nodded slowly. "I understand. It's just, my daughter asked me this morning if I'm scared." "What did you tell her?" "I told her that doing important things often means being a little scared. But we do them anyway." Sun Mi smiled. "That's exactly why I chose you for this mission." The final weeks were the hardest. Every day brought new equipment to test, new procedures to learn. The whole world was watching now. News of the Mars signals had leaked, and reporters camped outside the Institute day and night. The night before launch, Sun Mei stood looking at Hangul-1. The spacecraft shone under the bright lights of the launch facility. Everything they knew about Mars had changed in just a few months. Tomorrow, they would begin their journey to find out why. Dr. Park Min-ho joined her, looking up at the spacecraft. "Ready for tomorrow, Captain." "As ready as we'll ever be," Sun Mei replied. "Did you see the latest signal data?" Min-ho nodded. "They're twice as strong as when Dr. Han first discovered them. Whatever is causing them, it's getting more active." Sun Mei took a deep breath of the cool night air. In 24 hours, they would leave Earth behind. In 8 months, they would either make history or fail spectacularly. There would be no middle ground. "Get some sleep," she told Min-ho. "Tomorrow, we find out if humanity is really ready for what's waiting on Mars." 3 months into their journey to Mars, Ba Jinwoo sat at his communication station on Hangul-1. He adjusted his headphones, trying to clear up the signal from Earth. The daily report from Mission Control was coming through with more static than usual. "Mission Control, please repeat last message," Jinwoo said into his microphone. He heard only static in response. Captain Lee Sun Mei floated over to his station. In the zero gravity of space, her short hair drifted around her face. "Problems with the connection," Yes, Captain. The signal is getting weaker. Jin Woo typed quickly on his keyboard, trying different frequencies. It started yesterday, but now it's much worse. Dr. Park Min-ho, who was checking data from Mars nearby, spoke up. The signals from Mars are getting stronger, though. Much stronger. Could they be interfering with our communications? Before anyone could answer, a red light started flashing on the main control panel. A loud alarm filled the spacecraft. Solar flare detected. Dr. Kim Tas-sung shouted from his science station. Large one, heading our way. Captain Lee's training took over. Everyone to the radiation bunker. Now, Jinwoo, send a quick message to Earth. Dr. Kim, shut down non-essential systems. The crew moved quickly. They had practiced this many times on Earth, but this was real. A solar flare could fry their equipment and give them all dangerous doses of radiation if they weren't protected. In the radiation bunker, 8 people squeezed into a space meant for emergencies. The walls were lined with extra shielding. Dr. Choi Yuna checked the radiation meters she had brought. Radiation levels are rising fast, she reported. They sat in the dim light of the bunker for 6 hours. To pass the time, they talked about their families back on Earth. Dr. Kang Do-hyun showed pictures of his new baby nephew, born just after they left Earth. Nam Hai-jin, their pilot, taught them an old card game her grandmother had taught her. Finally, the radiation levels dropped enough for them to leave the bunker. But they found new problems waiting for them. The solar flare damaged some of our external sensors, Hai-jin reported as she checked her instruments. And our main communication array isn't responding. Jinwoo worked for hours trying to fix the communications. He put on a spacesuit and went outside the ship to check the antenna. Engineer Yang Ji-hoon went with him to help. The antenna is damaged, Ji-hoon reported through the radio. But we can fix it. We just need to replace 2 parts. Inside the ship, Dr. Han Ji-won noticed something strange on her instruments. Captain, the Mars signals. They changed during the solar flare. They got stronger, but also different, like they were reacting to the flare somehow. Captain Lee looked at the data. Could whatever is making these signals be using the solar energy somehow? Maybe, Ji-won said. But that would mean. It would mean the signals are coming from something that's still active, Min-ho finished. Not just some ancient machine running on its own. The crew gathered around the main screen, watching the signal patterns. They were now halfway to Mars, but the mystery was only getting deeper. That night, during his sleep shift, Jinwoo finally got the communications working again. Earth's voice came through his headphones, weak but clear. But as he listened to the messages from home, he kept hearing the strange signals from Mars in the background. They were getting louder every day, like something was calling to them across the emptiness of space. Captain Lee made a note in her log. Day 91 of mission. Solar flare incident managed successfully. Crew performed excellently under pressure, but the Mars signals are changing in ways we didn't expect. Whatever we find when we get there, I don't think we're ready for it. Nam Hai-jin stared through the cockpit window of Hangul-1 at the red surface of Mars growing larger below them. After 8 months in space, they were finally here. But Mars wasn't making it easy for them to land. Dust storm approaching from the west, she reported, checking her instruments. It's moving faster than expected. Captain Lee Sunmaid looked at the storm on their screens. It was massive, a wall of red dust racing toward their landing zone. How long until it reaches Jezero crater? 30 minutes, Hai-jin said. We need to land now, or we'll have to abort. The captain turned to the crew. Everyone to landing stations. This is what we trained for. Dr. Kim Tas-sung spoke up from his station. The signals are extremely strong now. Whatever's making them is right below us in that crater. The spacecraft shook as it entered Mars' atmosphere. Red flames appeared outside the windows as their heat shield did its work. Hai-jin's hands moved steadily over the controls, guiding them down. Heat shield temperature normal, Engineer Yang Ji-hoon reported. All systems working. The dust storm was getting closer. Through the windows, they could see its edge, like a giant red wave rolling across the Martian desert. The wind was already starting to shake their spacecraft. 10 minutes to landing, Hai-Jin announced. Her voice was calm, but her face showed deep concentration. The wind is stronger than our simulations. Dr. Han Ji-won watched her instruments carefully. The signals are changing again. They're pulsing faster now, almost like they know we're here. The spacecraft shook harder as they descended. Warning lights started flashing on Jae-hoon's panel. We're getting too much stress on the landing gear. Hai-Jin made a quick decision. She changed their landing approach, using the wind instead of fighting it. It was a dangerous move, one they had never practiced, but it was their only chance. Everyone hold on, she called out. The spacecraft tilted, riding the edge of the storm like a surfer on a wave. Captain Lee gripped her seat tightly, trusting her pilot's skills. The rest of the crew held their breath. With a hard thud, Hangul 1 touched down on Mars. The landing legs creaked under the strain, but they held. They were down. Landing successful, Hai-Jin reported, letting out a long breath. But we're not in our planned location. The wind pushed us 2 kilometers east. Captain Lee checked all the systems. Some were damaged, but nothing they couldn't fix. Good work, everyone. Especially you, Hai-Jin. That was incredible flying. Dr. Park Min-ho looked out at the Martian landscape through the dust. We're actually closer to where the signals are coming from now. Maybe the wind did us a favor. The storm raged around them for hours. Inside Hangul 1, the crew ran checks on their equipment and prepared for their first step onto Mars. Dr. Choi Yuna discovered that some of their scientific instruments were damaged in the landing. We'll have to adapt our research plans, she told the captain. Some experiments will have to wait until we can fix the equipment. When the storm finally passed, they got their first clear view of their landing site. The crater stretched out around them, its walls rising in the distance. Somewhere nearby, something was sending signals strong enough to reach Earth. Captain Lee made another log entry. We have landed on Mars. The journey here tested us, but that was just the beginning. Tomorrow, we take our first steps on this red world. Whatever sent those signals is out there, waiting for us, and we're going to find it. The morning light on Mars was different from Earth. Dr. Park Min-ho watched the pale sun rise over the crater's edge as he adjusted his spacesuit. It was their third day on Mars, and today they would take samples from an area where the signals were strongest. Dr. Choi Yuna checked his suit connections one last time. Remember, we only have 4 hours of air. No staying out longer this time. They stepped out of the airlock together. Their boots left clear prints in the red dust. The crater walls rose around them like giant cliffs. Ahead, their testing equipment was already set up, marking the spot where they would dig. The signals are very strong here, Min-ho said, looking at the device on his arm. Whatever's making them must be close. They started digging carefully. The Martian soil was different from what they expected. It was darker under the surface, almost black. After an hour, Yuna's tools hit something hard. Min-ho, look at this, she called out. She brushed away more soil, revealing a layer of rock. But this rock was unusual. It had patterns in it, like tiny tubes. Min-ho knelt down to look closer. His hand shook as he took pictures with his suit's camera. These look like fossilized bacteria, he said quietly, but they're bigger than any bacteria we've ever seen. They took samples and kept digging. Each new layer showed more fossils, but the real surprise came 2 hours later. The soil readings are strange here, Yuna said, checking her instruments. There's something active in it, something alive. Min-ho stared at her. Alive? Are you sure? They took more samples, working quickly now. The sun was high in the sky, and their air supply was running low. Back in Hangul 1's lab, they studied their findings while the rest of the crew gathered around. Look at this, Yuna said, pointing to her microscope screen. Tiny things were moving in the soil sample. They weren't bacteria, But they weren't like any life form from Earth either. Captain Lee Sunmai watched the screen carefully. How is this possible? Nothing should be able to live in Mars soil. It's too cold, too dry. Dr. Han Ji-won was checking the signal patterns again. The signals get stronger every time we find something new. It's like they're responding to us. Dr. Kim Ta-sung disagreed. We need to focus on these life forms first. The signals can wait. This is the biggest discovery in human history. No, Captain Lee said firmly. We follow our mission plan. We study both. Something is making those signals, and it might be connected to this life we found. The crew split into teams. Some would study the fossils and living organisms, while others would keep tracking the signals. But tension grew between the teams. Each thought their work was more important. That evening, Min-ho sat in the lab, studying the moving life forms. They seemed to be getting more active. On his other screen, the signal patterns were changing too, becoming more complex. What if they're connected? He said to himself. What if the signals aren't coming from some machine? What if they're coming from something alive? He started writing his report. Day 3 on Mars. We found what we came looking for. Life. But we may have found something much bigger. The real question now is, are we ready for what this discovery means? Engineer Yang Ji-hoon carefully set up the ground-penetrating radar equipment on the Martian surface. The morning sun cast long shadows across the crater, and his own shadow stretched out before him like a giant. The signals they had been tracking were now so strong that their instruments could barely measure them. Radar is ready, he reported through his suit radio. Inside Hangar 1, Dr. Han Jae-won started the scan. The radar waves went deep into the Martian ground, creating a picture of what lay beneath their feet. There's something down there, Jae-won said, her voice excited. A network of caves. No, not caves. These are too regular. They're tunnels. Captain Lee Sun-mei looked at the radar images. The tunnels formed a complex pattern under the crater, all connecting to a central point. How deep? She asked. About 50 meters down, Jae-won replied. And there's a large open space at the center. Jae-hoon had already started designing a drone to explore the tunnels. He worked quickly, using parts from their spare equipment. The drone was small enough to fit through narrow spaces, but strong enough to carry cameras and sensors. 3 hours later, they gathered to launch the drone. It disappeared into a narrow crack in the ground, sending back video as it went. The tunnels were smooth and round, nothing like natural caves. These were made by something, Dr. Kim Ta-sung said, watching the video feed. The walls are too perfect. The drone turned a corner and entered a larger tunnel. Suddenly, its lights showed something on the walls. Everyone grew quiet as they saw it. There were markings on the walls, regular patterns that couldn't be natural. Then the video feed went black. What happened? Captain Lee demanded. The drone stopped responding, Jae-hoon said, trying to restart it. All systems are dead. Captain Lee made a decision that would change everything. We need to see what's down there. Ji-hoon, how quickly can you set up climbing equipment? Dr. Park Min-ho spoke up. Captain, we don't know what killed the drone. It could be dangerous. That's why I'm going myself, she said. I won't risk anyone else. But Dr. Choi Yuna stepped forward. You'll need a scientist with you. I'll go. They prepared carefully. They took extra air supplies, better lights, and emergency beacons. An hour later, they started their descent into the tunnel. The climb down was slow. The tunnel walls were smooth and cold. Their lights showed more of the strange markings as they went deeper. These look like writing, Yuna said, taking pictures, or maybe a map. They reached the bottom of the tunnel. Their suit radios crackled with static, but they could still talk to each other. Ahead, the tunnel opened into a large room. Captain Lee's light beam showed something that made her stop. In the center of the room stood a tall structure, covered in the same markings they had seen on the walls. It was clearly a machine of some kind. This is it, she said quietly. This is what's making the signals. But as they moved closer, they saw something else. The machine wasn't just sending signals. It was active. Lights moved across its surface in patterns that matched the signals they had been tracking. "It's not just working," Yana said in amazement. "It's responding to us. It knows we're here." Captain Lee reached for her radio, hoping it would reach the surface. "Base, this is Captain Lee. You need to see this. We haven't just found evidence of past life on Mars. We found something that's still active, still waiting. And I think it's been waiting for us." The underground chamber hummed with energy. Captain Lee Sunmai and Dr. Choi Yuna stood before the mysterious machine, their suit lights reflecting off its smooth surface. The rest of the crew had joined them now, after setting up safety lines and communication equipment to the surface. Dr. Kim Ta-sung walked slowly around the machine, taking measurements. "It's drawing power from somewhere," he said, "but there's no power source that I can see." Engineer Yang Ji-hoon studied the markings on the walls more carefully. "These patterns, they're not just decorative. They look like circuit diagrams, but far more advanced than anything we have on Earth." Dr. Han Jae-won compared the signals they had been tracking to the machine's activity. "The signals match perfectly," she said. "This machine has been calling to Earth for years, maybe centuries. We just weren't listening properly until now." Dr. Park Min-ho was examining the floor around the machine. "Look at this," he called out. The floor had more markings, arranged in circles around the central machine. "These symbols look familiar somehow." Dr. Kim moved closer to look. His eyes widened behind his helmet visor. "They're similar to markings found in ancient structures on Earth, in Egypt, South America, and Asia. How is that possible?" Captain Lee touched the machine's surface carefully. As her gloved hand made contact, the patterns of light changed. New symbols appeared, glowing softly in the dark chamber. "It's responding to us," Dr. Han said excitedly. "The signals are changing again." Suddenly, the chamber filled with light. The machine projected images into the air around them. They saw stars, planets, and what looked like maps of the galaxy. "It's some kind of research facility," Dr. Kim said, his voice full of wonder. The ancient Martians were studying the universe. They were scientists, like us. Engineer Yang pointed to one projection. "These look like plans, engineering designs for spacecraft. They're far more advanced than anything we've built." As they watched, the projections changed, showing more detailed information. The machine was sharing its knowledge with them, but slowly, as if it was being careful not to overwhelm them. "This changes everything we thought we knew," Captain Lee said. "Not just about Mars, but about Earth too. If similar symbols exist in ancient Earth structures, then the Martians didn't just study the stars," Dr. Kim finished. "They visited Earth. They might have influenced our earliest civilizations." Dr. Park was recording everything with his suit's cameras. But why did they leave? And why did they leave this machine running, sending signals into space? Dr. Han studied the new data appearing before them. "I don't think they meant to leave forever," she said. "This facility, it's not just a research center, it's a message. They left it here for whoever would come looking." Captain Lee touched her radio. "Base, are you getting all this? We need to alert Earth. The whole world needs to know what we found." The machine's lights pulsed brighter, as if agreeing with her words. In that ancient chamber, under the surface of Mars, humanity had found not just evidence of alien life, but a connection to its own past, and perhaps a key to its future. 1 month after discovering the underground facility, the crew of Hangul 1 had made remarkable progress. Engineer Yang Ji-hoon and Dr. Han Ji-won had learned to interact with the ancient machine's control systems. Each day brought new discoveries about the Martians and their advanced technology. Dr. Kim Ta-sung sat at his workspace, studying the latest data from the machine. "They didn't just leave Mars," he announced one morning. "They went to another star system." Captain Lee Sunbai looked up from her own work. "How do you know?" Kim pointed to a star map floating above the machine. These are travel records. They show a journey to a star system 40 light-years away. They left because their sun was becoming unstable. They knew Mars would eventually become too cold for life. Dr. Park Min-ho was examining the living organisms they had found in the soil. These tiny life forms, he said, they were left here on purpose. They're like caretakers, maintaining the facility until someone came to find it. The machine had begun sharing more of its knowledge. It showed them new ways to create energy, methods of space travel they had never imagined, and medical advances that could change life on Earth forever. But why leave all this for us to find? Dr. Choi Yuna asked. Why not just take everything with them? Dr. Han stepped forward. She had been working on translating more of the ancient messages. I think I know why, she said. They left it as a test. They wanted to be sure whoever found this facility was ready for this knowledge. That's why the signals got stronger when we showed we could understand them. Va Jinwoo, who had been maintaining their communication with Earth, spoke up. The whole world is waiting to hear what we found. Every space agency, every government wants to know more. Captain Lee gathered her crew together. That's what worries me, she said. This knowledge, this technology, it could help humanity reach the stars. But it could also be dangerous if used wrongly. We need to be careful about how we share it. They spent the next week preparing their reports. They decided to share their discoveries slowly, starting with the scientific principles that would help Earth the most. The knowledge about advanced weapons and powerful energy sources would wait until humanity was ready. One evening, as the Martian sun set outside, the machine showed them something new. It was a message left by the ancient Martians themselves. To those who find this place, Dr. Han translated, we leave you our knowledge and our hope. We have watched your world grow. When you were ready, when you could reach Mars and understand our signals, we knew it was time. You are now part of a larger community among the stars. Use this knowledge wisely. And when you are ready, come find us. Captain Lee made her final log entry. We came to Mars looking for signs of past life. Instead, we found a door opening to humanity's future. The Martians didn't die out. They evolved, grew, and moved on. They left us an invitation to join them among the stars. But first, we have to prove we're ready for that journey. Our discovery on Mars isn't an ending. It's just the beginning of humanity's next great adventure. Back on Earth, the first parts of the Martians' knowledge were already changing the world. New technologies were being developed. Old energy problems were being solved. And everywhere, people looked up at the night sky with new eyes, knowing that somewhere out there, the Martians were waiting for humanity to join them.